In a tech world full of abbreviations like ATO and CMMC, today, the king of all acronyms, SAIC. Hit the music, Manny. Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast, the podcast that connects you to federal technology leaders. My name is John Gilroy, and I will be your moderator. Our guest today is world-famous Bob Ritchie, Chief Technology Officer at the aforementioned SAIC. Bob Ritchie, how are you?
I'm doing great, John. How about yourself?
The last time we were face-to-face downtown, he had all these paparazzi, these people, with confetti and flowers, and he was all being followed around begging for autographs. Wow. And I think that's because they anticipated a great podcast, and Bob was one of the best podcasts I did last year. So round of applause. Yay. Wish I had one of those buttons. Yay. It was so great. So I figured, well, hey, he only looks like a dummy. Let's bring him back in again and see what he has to say.
Awesome. Thanks for having me back, John.
There's so much to talk about, and I think most of our listeners know about SAIC and a pretty good idea what you do, and well-respected company, long time in the Washington, D.C. area, and they may even heard of you after our last podcast. So what I wanted to do is maybe come up with an inside the Beltway little debate, okay? So Bob and I are sitting at a coffee shop in Falls Church, and we're arguing about, who the commander should draft. And I say, you don't know what you're talking about. And he says, I don't know what you're talking, back and forth. And then we talk about some terms. And I think most people know what a systems integrator is, SI. I mean, in this town, everyone knows what a systems integrator is, but some people don't know what a mission integrator is. And so I thought today, hey, let's take and open up this little box of worms and talk about a mission integrator versus system integration. So toss to you, Bob.
All right. Thanks, John. Yeah. So I'll start off with just a really simple, straightforward definition of systems integrator. And it's one of those things that thankfully it's plain English words for both of the conjunctions. So it is an integrator of technology systems, whether cyber physical systems or pure software systems, but a company or companies that traditionally would take those systems, integrate them together for the purposes of ideally creating a better outcome than what each of them could stand alone before. So think, putting a Lego set together. At the end of the day, you're left with a Lego set. But so what, right? So that one of the issues and why we think that mission integrator and the reason why it exists as a different type of domain or a different type of market is it's really certainly built on the same engineering principles and foundations of systems integration. You still need to be able to assess and rapidly integrate capabilities together. But the so what is what drives you. The so what is what you start with. And so the real kind of profound difference is how do you kind of declare victory upon integration? And when I say systems integrator, or to go back to the analogy of building a Lego kit, when I'm done, I'm done. I followed all the instructions, all the Legos came together, and I've got, I'm a Harry Potter fan. So, I'll say I've got my Harry Potter Hogwarts castle and, the little flying Lego pieces around it, if there's Dementors or something like that. And I can play with it. But did it drive any value other than my own intrinsic value of feeling like, hey, I set out to put these pieces together. I put them together. They're now together and I can play with it, I guess, or I can review it and observe it and show it off to others. Mission integration is more about what was the hypothesis that you were thinking you needed systems integration for. And so instead of saying, hey, I'm going to go out there and say, here's a set of instructions I want you to follow, or in the kind of acquisition world with the federal government, here is, really bespoke requirements that it took me a long time to come up with. I want you to put these requirements together. I want you to fulfill these requirements in this explicit way because I think it's going to add value. Instead, mission integration says, what is your mission outcome or outcomes that you're trying to get to? And then leave the door open for us to iteratively learn together what are the right instructions for us to follow along the way. Because the technologies that are available to us today are not the technologies that will be available to us. In the old days, we'd say, 12 to 18 months from now. Now it's next week's technologies are going to be very different than this week's technologies with the pace of innovation. And the role of a mission integrator is to keep tabs on all of that technological change, but never lose sight of the purpose, which is to drive those mission outcomes, drive faster decisions, drive decision advantage when you're thinking in the defense and national security space, drive to a better citizen experience or constituent experience when you're thinking about filing your taxes or applying for a passport or a visa. And all of these citizen services kind of involve systems integration and traditionally have. That's what inside the Beltway we've all kind of done for the last 40 or 50 years, is really get good at putting technology together. The difference now is we're putting technology together with that mission purpose.
I teach downtown, and it's almost like the undergraduates kind of learn, basics about history. But in the graduate school, then you got to defend it. Then you go up against guys like Bob, and you got to make a statement and go back and forth and maybe support it somehow or other. It's almost like, yeah, you're a system integrator. Okay. You put all the building blocks together. Well, that's great. Now, what does it do or why? I mean, and so I think this is the next level. And a lot of people use the word maturity, which is rarely used around me. And I know a real immature guy by the name of Joel, by the way. Anyway, so we talk about software development lifecycle and maturity, and maybe it's maturity of the mission or maturity of the cloud application. So this is the next step. It's like, okay, now we got to do the filters. This is the graduate school here, huh?
Yeah,
that part.
Absolutely. And maturity is a great way to kind of frame it out, whether a formal maturity framework like a CMMI or a less formal one that is really around, do you have your fundamentals in place, right? So if you're playing sports, do you have good form or do you have bad form? Do we need to address those fundamentals? Or are you at a point now where you can start thinking creatively about what you do? And that is definitely a maturation. I love that analogy you gave between undergraduate. You're really learning the fundamentals, right? I'm learning about computer science, or I'm learning about physical engineering or architecture. And then when you get to the graduate level, you start to really understand deeper the history of how things got to be that way. Why was this the state of the art that I was taught in undergraduate? What were the art forms that came before it? What are the alternatives so I can start thinking about what may come in the future and start objectively analyzing, which of those paths should I bet on in terms of technology curves to pay attention to. And then you start even getting beyond that graduate level and getting into the philosophical, or we'll call it doctoral level of why. Why should I pick one solution over another? And to your point, really getting into some fundamental debates and trade-offs that are existential to a mission outcome, especially if we're looking at a budget-constrained environment. This is something that we at SAIC have been talking a lot about the last 10 years. There was a technology shift in 2015 around Kubernetes when it first came out. And we were early adopters of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. But even then, that was technology more at that fundamental level. How do I get my arms around this fundamental technology of secure container orchestration? And because we've matured at that level, now we don't kind of play as much in that theater of which Kubernetes distro, or do I have the right CI/CD pipelines, or and kind of reiterating on that platform level theater, and instead understand that to be a commodity, to just make a decision and move up stack and really drive rapid mission outcomes. And that's kind of the difference back to the previous point around systems integration versus mission integration is we're consistently churning out and pipelining folks who have the technical fundamentals in that undergraduate program, so to speak, of the traditional federal systems integrator space. What we're missing at scale is really the ecosystem, the graduate level ecosystem. And so at SAIC, we kind of think of mission integration space as 3 E's, the experience, so mission experience, expertise, that technical expertise or those fundamentals, being really crisp on the fundamentals, and then the innovation partner ecosystem, right? So creating that graduate level ecosystem within kind of this space that's very mission focused on national imperatives. And you see this happening both within some of the shifts like an SAIC, who used to be a traditional SI 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, going back to our roots 50 plus years ago, to make that kind of fundamental shift. But you're also seeing it in kind of the non-traditionals and the Silicon Valley startups who have this now patriotic national focus. And those are the folks we want to work together with to create this innovative ecosystem that becomes the graduate level program, to take all that power and momentum of the technology and funnels it through to the right mission outcomes.
Yeah. I go to a lot of events, that, and I was at an event, I think in December, and I sit at a table with a bunch of govies, and it was a young lady about my daughter's age. And she said, "Hey, you're an old man." She said, "Hey, you got some experience. Can you tell me how to be successful?" And I said, "Well, here's what you do. I don't care where you work, whatever agency you find out exactly what their goals are, and then you align whatever you're doing to those goals. And I don't know what the goals are, and they're going to change. But that's not what's important. What's important is that you can't go off and study, let's say, post-quantum encryption when your goal is the agency wants to, move into the different types of, let's talk about hybrid cloud. So you can learn post-quantum encryption all day and all night, but if it doesn't help your agency get to the goal, they're not going to care. And so I think this is what you're saying is that, yes, we can learn post-quantum encryption. Yes, we can learn about satellite communication. So what? That's not what you want. What we're focusing on now is optimizing data center usage. So it's really it's almost like someone's been knocked around and beat up and so, well, how do you do? Well, here's what you do. You don't waste your time on X. You focus on, and this is what you're focusing on, aligning. And this is what my notes was, aligning systems and aligning goals.
Yeah, no, spot on. And I think it's one of those beautiful things that you don't lose on some of the really exciting new technologies, because oftentimes the new technologies that are emergent are actually presenting new ways for you to rethink even old problems. So problems that we have, used to do on pen and paper. You think in maybe the command and control space that's evolved of, that is as old as warfare itself to some degree, right? And the idea of having and maintaining situational awareness, and then the ability to make rapid decisions and see those decisions carried out, take the outputs of that and bring it back for replanning and reassessing in an iterative loop. Technology's only helped digitize that and make that better and faster. Now we're looking at a landscape where the data that's exploded kind of over that ecosystem it's exponential year over year, where you're getting, instead of in the order of magnitudes of terabytes and petabytes, you're getting exabytes, and not just exabytes, over the course of a year. This is exabytes in the course of an hour or a minute of a campaign of all the data that you have to process. So if you start from that angle, yes, absolutely, being able to massively scale and process data is a technical skill set to drive from. To your point, post-quantum encryption keeps that data safe. If post-quantum encryption becomes an imperative as part of that mission outcome, then you'll learn it.
Yes,
exactly.
That's exactly right.
This is one of those beautiful things where I love your analogy for undergrad to graduate. It underpins, and this is going to get philosophical for a second, John, so I apologize. But what's the meaning of life? Why are we all here? Well, one thing that we as human beings can do that a lot of other species on the planet have never been able to do is learn and never stop learning. So there's always something new to learn. And there's never a wasteful. I never look back and said, well, that technology didn't pan out, so I'm sad that I learned it, right? I've never heard anybody say that. And so if you use the mission that you care about and the imperatives that you care about drive you towards the technologies that are going to help unlock or enable those to new frontiers, you will open up a guide, to your point, in terms of what do I choose to focus on next? And in no way, you're just constantly building out your toolbox. Now, can you stay sharp in every technology you've ever learned always? No, but it's kind of like riding a bike. If an older technology reemerges as technically relevant, it's really quick to go back and pick it up. And this is another beautiful thing, from our last conversation with Joel, that other immature guy like ourselves, the kind of preponderance of large language models and AI assistance in our workflows makes that recall even easier, even better, because it's contextually reminding you. So I don't even have to, have that recall. I now can recognize that, this is actually emerging as that old pattern, and I'm getting that recognition by something presenting it to me. And so that's really an important part of this kind of innovative ecosystem for the mission integrator, is to have that AI assistant as part of the team, as part of that ecosystem, to have those right hyperscalers, like you mentioned, from the cloud perspective. Don't move to cloud for cloud's sake. Move to cloud as a way to enable your mission outcomes to get to kind of value faster, or velocity to value faster. And then leverage the other components of technology. I hear, so I'll go on a little diatribe about mainframes. Mainframes, before I was back at SAIC full-time in 2019, I was at Capital One. And being in the financial industry, we had tons of dependencies on mainframes. But did we look at it as, hey, I got to do everything I can to get off our mainframes? Maybe at first, right? Maybe we were in those fundamental undergrad level looking at it of like, I got to close down all my mainframes and move everything to cloud. But if you look at what mainframes are really good at, high speed volume transactions with zero to, minimal error rates, and just use the mainframe for that, the cost per transaction of a mainframe of processing, millions of financial transactions per second is way cheaper per transaction compared to what it would be in the cloud. And so this is one of those earlier, like you get to that graduate level of understanding like, oh, I could do this in the cloud, but it's going to cost me 100 times more. So this is probably something I want to keep doing in the mainframe. And that's another kind of, I would say, attribute of a mission integrator is being pragmatic enough to understand that even 20 or 30-year-old technology has a place. It's kind of more getting it to the cohesion that the thing that it was built for should be what you use it for. The challenge with mainframes over the years was it was the technology that was at hand. So folks like Capital One and other banks built a lot of business logic into that mainframe because they had the mainframe sitting around. They said, well, I got it. It understands COBOL. I'm going to program some logic in there for doing bankruptcy notices and collections and whatever else that a financial institution has to care about. That's where your technical debt in mainframes could be better served moving to cloud. But if you're just saying, hey, I just want to get to cloud as your outcome, you're totally unmoored from the business value that you're trying to drive or the mission outcome.
You're taking a mature approach to this, aren't you? Yes. I mean, that's what it is. It's like, I have an old car in the garage and it's a Toyota and it keeps running. Well, I should buy a new one. Well, no, you don't have to buy a new one. It's still running. And that's what the objective. I just go 4 miles to work. Well, we can make all kinds of, I went to your LinkedIn profile and you recommended a video by a guy named Peter Van Harenberg, Harrenberg. Everyone should watch this video. It's a great, if you do any type of software, if you even know software developers, you should just understand his humor, his approach, and his quotes. Really, really, really bright. He said something that I'm going to toss out to you and you could run with it. He said that complexity occurs when systems interact. Oh, 5 hours later, ends his discussion on complex systems because you talked about scaling earlier and interacting. And all of a sudden you have a system that I make the pancakes, I set them to you, and you put them on the plate. Okay, now I have to make 500 pancakes. Well, I can't hand them to Bob anymore. So when systems scale, and you talked about exabytes, then we get complexity. So complexity can be just the system itself. Complexity can be a problem of scale. So this whole, and this is a t-shirt, man. Complexity occurs when systems interact. Yeah, man. Talk about the federal government, huh?
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's one of the most fascinating things. And I'll harken back a little bit to my time at Capital One in terms of really experiencing that firsthand, right? Because a large financial institution like Capital One went through some acquisitive growth over the years in terms of buying up more local and regional banks in order to kind of build out its retail banking side. In order, because the way that financial regulations work, to have a large credit card business, you have to maintain a certain number of assets, and a good number of ways that institutions like Capital One do that is by maintaining retail direct banks and commercial banks in order to hold on to those assets. The complexities that go into a merger and acquisition, and so the traditional SI world's not foreign to these at all either, are very akin to the complexities of systems interacting in the federal government. In fact, in a number of ways, traditional SIs mirror the bureaucracy internal that exists in the federal government as a mechanism to try and govern or deal with some of those complexities that are just baked in over time. And in fact, the risk in some of those complexities is it's too much of a rat's nest to ever look inside. And so when you have a new capability, what do? You bolt on the new capability on the outside. And now you've just compounded the complecting of the rat's nest. And there's another great talk out there by Ritchie called Simple Made Easy. If you don't want to do the whole long talk, but it kind of introduces the difference between simplex and complex as a different axis altogether from easy and hard. And in fact, simple systems are very hard. It is very, very hard to keep things simple. And that is when you're talking about those mature trade-off decisions of mission integration, you sometimes have to sacrifice complexity in the near term to not refactor too soon, but to get to a mission outcome, but to do so with complete being deliberate in doing so, I guess is the way I would put it, in that I'm making a conscious choice to integrate a system a specific way, or integrate a set of data a specific way into my ecosystem to meet the immediate need, with the earmark that this is something we need to revisit in a quarter or in a year, because the technology that is coming soon is going to make the kind of pros and cons of today's decision different. And if that technology does come to fruition, great, we get to revisit it. If a year from now it still hasn't come to fruition, it's still something we can say, hey, we revisited it. And it's still the kind of balance of power says keep with the complex integration. But here's another kind of, we'll call it magic combatant to complexity of integrating large systems, is if the systems themselves don't have to interact with each other, but instead you can get to a common data layer, or an enterprise or a mission data layer, where the systems are all either producing or consuming data events off of this data layer, you can greatly reduce the complexity of these systems that build up over time. And it really, if you think about the way the world works, we are, human beings are data emitters and data consumers in all facets of our life, whether we're listening to the great podcasts from John, or watching TV, or listening to nature, right, on a hike outside. We are taking in tons of data all the time. We are also emitting tons of data all the time that others could or could not observe. That's up, really up to the consumer. But the kind of key aspect there is the world doesn't slow down with every new birth, right? We've introduced a new system into the ecosystem, but the world doesn't stop. The world doesn't even hiccup, right? That is a new kind of part of the broader organism that is the human race. And that's the type of kind of mission integration insight. When you get to a truly mature level, you can really get to that kind of almost flattened data layer across all of your missions. And so I make the joke all the time internal to SAIC, because we often will focus on one specific national imperative at a time in terms of thinking through mission problems. So whether it's all domain warfighting, or border of the future, or next generation space, there is a lot to be done to kind of break down the complexity of the existing systems and integrate the right technologies to put them on a path towards a scalable and sustainable future. But then if we look across these national imperatives, you start to really think about like an all of government mission data layer. What would it mean for insights from the IRS to be shared with Department of Justice, to be shared with DHS and national security, and on the intel side? What would it mean for the State Department to have access to the same kind of streams of data with the right need to know to make real-time decisions about passports and visas? So some of these really painful user experiences that were created when we were doing things with pencil and paper are now, technology has made some of the back office functions a little more automated, but the in-citizen experience is still very much the same. I'm still filing my taxes. I might file my taxes online, but it's just an online version of my paper taxes. I might be able to get a passport faster, but I still have to go in person to the office to do so. Where eventually we could get to a truly integrated system of systems in this kind of mission integration environment, where everything is capable of making a real-time decision based on the history of events that have ever happened across Bob Ritchie or John Gilroy's life, from a border crossing to from a financial institution, a line of credit extension, to even continuous vetting of security clearances and need to know. And those are some really manpower intensive and expensive bureaucratic processes that exist today.
So, Bob, stand-up comedians have this thing called a callback. At the end of their set, they'll come back to the initial thought and put it all together. So I'm going to do a callback here. So we talked about mission integration, and we talked about Peter Van Herenberg. So I put it all together. In this talk that you referred to earlier, he says really good things. He said, vigilance is not a strategy. Okay. So undergraduate, you learn vigilance. Graduate school, well, okay, now you know it. So what? I mean, now you have to apply it to a hybrid environment. You have to apply it to a rapidly changing environment. You got to apply vigilance to a scaling environment. You got to apply vigilance to repatriation. Whoa, there's a nasty word. Don't say that word in front of me, Bob. Don't say that repatriation word. And so it's back to the mission of, so what you have to do is you can take skill set and apply it. And vigilance is a skill set that's important with cybersecurity, important with a lot of things, but it's going back. Call back to hey, John, it's all about the mission, isn't it? So this is what it focuses, isn't it?
Yeah, spot on. At the end of the day, the so what or the why, that I think we all need to answer is, why do we do what we do? Some of us love technology. John, I know you love technology as much as I do. And maybe that would be enough, that we just get to, the why is we get to play with cool tech, to do fun things, interesting things, and really push the envelope. But at the end of the day, the purpose that comes from rooting your why or your so what in a mission outcome that's important not just to ourselves or to our own kind of intrinsic value, but that has long-lasting impacts around the nation itself and all of our citizens, and family members, everybody. That really motivates to get through some of the challenges that are, from a vigilance standpoint. You could say it was strategy or culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? So vigilance, a vigilant culture could eat strategy for breakfast, but there's kind of a counterpoint to that the quickest way to erode your strategies to erode your culture is to allow some of these cracks in the system that undermine, right? So if you say, I'm going to create toil for toil's sake, I'm going to create bureaucracy for bureaucracy's sake, you can get to a place where the vigilance of the mission focus is completely undercut and undermined. And that I think is a trap we all fall into from time to time as we get hyper-focused on, I built a really cool thing, it drove this mission outcome, and we get married to that mission outcome. Like, I was very successful in driving a shortening of the decision loop for this very important strategic deterrence. And I feel really good about that. I feel good today about that. Now, the challenge with vigilance is we need to also be vigilant back, kind of retrospectively on ourselves to say, don't fall in love with that. Otherwise, you become the problem of tomorrow, right? You need to be vigilant back to your own principles and say, now that I did that, how do I work myself out of that job so I can free myself up for the next most important mission, which may be revisiting and removing the thing I'm proud about, because right, which is a completely foreign thing to a lot of us, especially as engineers. But if you think it, take a step back and take a more macro view of it, it really frees you up to continually focus on that mission outcome or the evolving mission outcomes. And it's also, I'll say, from an incremental year-over-year O&M tail, the operations and maintenance tail of any solution out there. With the pace of technology it is today, it should be also very unencumbering to think of the designs I think of today aren't going to be everlasting for 10, 15, 20 years. That's not the way technology is pacing anymore. And so you can decide faster. You don't need to deliberate for 12 or 18 months. You decide faster, put it out there. Did it achieve the outcomes? No, it didn't. Learn your lessons and reapply. And I think that in order to stay vigilant to that, it just becomes really important to kind of put purpose over profits. And that's, I would say, another very important ethos is that the end of the day, the values and the principles of the mission outcome are what drive us. And maybe in the 1 year, 2 year, 5 year time horizon, that might mean that we break some eggs, but over the enduring period, the ecosystem itself is going to drive the nation to the right mission outcome.
Well, we talked about mission outcomes and breaking eggs. So we covered everything in this interview, Bob. This is pretty good. I only got to 3 questions. I have 2 pages here, so I don't know. I'll have to figure something out or have Joel come in and make the questions even better or something. I don't know, but this has been really fascinating. You have been listening to the Federal Tech Podcast with John Gilroy. I'd like to thank my guest, Bob Ritchie, Chief Technology Officer at SAIC. Thank you.